What if an entire empire could vanish, but the walls built to protect it never fell? What if a fortress could be so massive that it swallowed a mountain so remote that armies simply gave up trying to reach it? Or so well hidden that modern satellite maps still fail to capture its true scale? Across every continent, colossal stone strongholds once held the fate of kings, revolutionaries, and entire civilizations inside their walls. And then the world simply forgot them. Some were carved into cliffs. Some were built by people the history books never credited. Some are so isolated that reaching them today still requires days of walking through terrain that has not changed in 1,000 years. We begin close to civilization in a fortress built directly into the mouth of a cave. But hold on, because with every destination, the walls will grow taller, the isolation deeper, and the history stranger, until we reach a fortress built by people who had just won their freedom, and who built it because they refused to ever lose it again. Predjama Castle, Slovenia, built directly into the mouth of a 123-meter-high cliff near the town of Postojna. Predjama Castle looks less like a building and more like something grown out of the rock itself. Its Renaissance structure, dating largely from the 16th century, sits wedged into a natural cave opening, using the cliff as both foundation and rear wall, a design that made frontal assault almost impossible. Beneath the visible castle, an extensive network of cave tunnels connects to the surface. Far from the fortress, local legend tells of Erazem Przemyski, a rebellious knight who used these hidden passages to smuggle in fresh supplies during a lengthy siege, allowing his garrison to taunt starving attackers below. Historical records suggest Erazem was eventually killed when a cannonball struck the very room he was standing in. Information reportedly betrayed to the besiegers, though exact details remain debated among historians. Exact details of his death remain debated among historians rather than fully confirmed. Visitors today can explore both the castle and its connected cave system, though the caves themselves stay cold, damp, and only partially mapped even now. If a castle can hide inside a cliff face in the middle of Europe, imagine what remains hidden in mountains far less visited than the Alps. Rocca Calascio, Italy, perched at over 1,400 meters above sea level in Italy's Gran Sasso Massif. Rocca Calascio holds the record as the highest fortress in the Apennine mountain range, a position chosen specifically to watch for invading armies from miles in every direction. Built beginning around the 10th century and expanded over subsequent centuries, the fortress originally protected trade routes and shepherding communities, a strategic function tied directly to the area's medieval wool economy. A powerful earthquake in 1703 devastated much of the surrounding village, and the fortress itself was gradually abandoned as residents relocated to safer, lower ground, leaving the stone tower to stand empty against the mountain wind for centuries. Harsh winters at this altitude bring brutal winds and heavy snow that isolate the site for months. The same exposure that once helped defenders spot enemies now makes the ruins dangerous to visit outside of stable weather. Film crews rediscovered the fortress in the late 20th century using its stark silhouette in several productions, which helped return international attention to a site that locals had quietly maintained for generations. From an abandoned mountain watchtower in Italy, we travel to a fortress that religious refugees once considered their final line of defense. Château de Pérepertuz, France, stretched along a narrow limestone ridge in the Corbière Mountains. Château de Pérepertuz extends for nearly 300 meters, making it one of the longest fortified structures built along a single natural rock spine in Europe. Constructed primarily during the 12th and 13th centuries, the fortress became one of the last refuges for Cathars, a Christian sect declared heretical, during the brutal Albigensian Crusade that sought to eliminate their movement entirely. Because the site sits nearly 800 meters above the surrounding valley, attacking forces faced an exhausting climb before ever reaching the walls, buying defenders crucial time and visibility that flatland castles simply could not offer. The fortress is technically divided into two connected sections, an older lower castle and a taller upper keep. allowing defenders to retreat further upward if outer walls were ever breached. Steep drop-offs along the exposed ridge make the site genuinely dangerous in poor weather, and sudden mountain winds have caught unprepared visitors off guard even in modern times. From a mountain refuge built for a persecuted faith, we now travel toward Central Europe, where an entire fortified city was constructed. Spiš Castle, Slovakia. Rising above the Spiš region of eastern Slovakia, this fortress ranks among the largest castle complexes in Central Europe, covering roughly 4 hectares of hilltop terrain that once housed not just soldiers but an entire self-sufficient medieval community. First constructed in the 12th century and expanded steadily afterward, the castle controlled a critical trade route connecting Poland, Hungary, and the rest of the Holy Roman Empire, making its ownership a constant point of political negotiation and conflict for centuries. A devastating fire in 1780 gutted much of the complex, and rather than rebuild, subsequent owners abandoned it entirely, leaving the skeleton of the fortress to stand exposed to the elements for over 200 years. Archaeological work at the site has uncovered evidence of daily medieval life, from tools to religious artifacts, offering historians a rare, detailed picture of how an entire fortified community actually functioned rather than simply how it defended itself. UNESCO recognized the site's importance in 1993, though much of the complex remains partially ruined, with certain sections still considered structurally unstable for visitors. From a self-contained fortress city guarding a European crossroads, we now travel south to a single fortress that changed hands so many times. Kalemegdan Fortress, Belgrade, Serbia, standing at the exact confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers. Kalemegdan Fortress occupies one of the most strategically valuable pieces of land in European history, which explains why Celts, Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, and Austrians all fought to control this single hilltop across roughly 2,000 years. Archaeological layers beneath the current fortress reveal foundations from at least 6 distinct historical periods, each civilization building directly on top of the ruins left by the last, creating a physical timeline of European power struggles compressed into one location. The fortress, as it largely appears today, reflects extensive Ottoman and Austrian reconstruction from the 17th and 18th centuries, a period when the site changed hands between the two empires multiple times within a single generation. Historians estimate the location endured dozens of sieges throughout its history, a number so high that few other European fortifications come close to matching its record of continuous military relevance. Modern Belgrade grew directly around this fortress, meaning the site today sits inside a busy capital city rather than in isolation, a rare contrast to the remote strongholds we have seen so far. If a single hilltop fortress can outlast 6 empires, what happens when a fortress is deliberately built to never be conquered at all? Königstein Fortress, Germany, set high atop a sandstone plateau in the region known as Saxon Switzerland. Königstein Fortress holds a claim shared by almost no other European stronghold. Throughout its entire recorded history, it was never successfully taken by force. The fortress sits on a naturally isolated tableland with sheer cliff faces on nearly every side, a geological feature that made traditional siege tactics almost useless against it for over 700 years of continuous use. Saxon rulers eventually converted sections of the fortress into a political prison, holding notable figures including the revolutionary anarchist Mikhail Bakunin during the 19th century. During the Second World War, the fortress served briefly as a prisoner of war facility, adding yet another layer to a site whose function shifted dramatically depending on the century. Ice storms and heavy fog regularly roll across the exposed plateau, conditions that once helped defenders spot approaching enemies, but today occasionally strand modern visitors on the narrow access road for hours. From a fortress that simply could not be beaten, we now travel to a stone city built into a mountainside so steep, Gjirokastra Castle, Albania. Overlooking the Drino Valley in southern Albania, the castle of Gjirokastra crowns a city so uniformly built from local stone that UNESCO designated the entire settlement, not just the fortress, as a heritage site under the name City of Stone. Construction on the fortress began as early as the 12th century, with major Ottoman-era expansions following, transforming it into one of the largest castles in the Balkan Peninsula by footprint. During the 20th century, Albania's communist government repurposed sections of the fortress as a political prison, a grim chapter that many local residents still remember through family stories rather than official records. The steep cobblestone streets surrounding the fortress were deliberately engineered by medieval builders to slow any invading force, forcing soldiers into narrow, easily defended passages that modern tourists still navigate today, often struggling with the incline themselves. An American military aircraft, downed during the Second World War, is displayed near the fortress entrance, a striking and unexpected reminder of the region's more recent conflicts layered atop centuries of older warfare. From a stone city built to slow down armies, we now travel to a fortress constructed in just a few short months to control one of the most important waterways on Earth. Rumeli Hisar, Istanbul, Turkey. Positioned at the narrowest point of the Bosphorus Strait, Rumeli Hisar was built in 1452 under the direct order of Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, who needed to cut off Constantinople's access to reinforcements and supplies arriving from the Black Sea. Historical accounts describe the fortress being completed in roughly 4 months, an extraordinarily fast construction timeline, achieved by dividing the labor among 3 separate teams working simultaneously on different towers. Combined with a smaller fortress built earlier on the opposite Asian shore, Rumeli Hisar allowed Ottoman forces to control ship traffic through the strait entirely, effectively sealing off Constantinople in the months before its historic fall in 1453. The fortress features 3 massive towers connected by thick curtain walls, a design built specifically to mount heavy cannons capable of striking any vessel attempting to pass through the narrow waterway below. Today the site sits within a much larger modern Istanbul, though the strong currents of the Bosphorus that once trapped enemy ships still make the surrounding waters dangerous for unprepared swimmers and small boats. From a fortress built to end an empire, we now travel toward a war-scarred fortress that one historic explorer once called the finest castle in the world. Crac des Chevaliers, Syria. Standing on a rocky outcrop in western Syria, Crac des Chevaliers was expanded by the Knights Hospitaller into one of the most sophisticated crusader fortresses ever constructed, featuring a concentric design with an outer wall and an inner keep. British officer and writer T.E. Lawrence once described it as the finest castle in the world, a reputation the site held for generations. The fortress reportedly withstood numerous sieges over nearly 2 centuries before finally falling to Mamluk forces in 1271. Reportedly through a forged letter rather than direct military defeat, according to historical accounts of the surrender. During Syria's civil war in the 2010s, the fortress suffered direct damage from shelling and airstrikes, marking one of the few times in its long history that modern warfare threatened its ancient walls. Ongoing political instability has made independent travel difficult, hiding one of history's most celebrated fortresses behind a modern conflict most tourists cannot safely cross. From a fortress damaged by war, we travel to a desert cliff. Masada, Israel. Rising nearly 400 meters above the Judean desert near the Dead Sea, Masada was originally fortified by King Herod the Great, who built lavish palaces atop the plateau alongside massive storerooms and cisterns capable of sustaining a large population during isolation. Roman forces besieged the fortress around 73 CE, eventually constructing a massive earthen ramp up one side of the plateau. A ramp still visible today and considered one of the best preserved Roman siege works anywhere in the world. According to Josephus, the fortress's Jewish defenders chose mass suicide rather than surrender once Roman breach became inevitable, a dramatic account that has become deeply significant in modern Israeli national memory, though some modern historians debate the precise details. Excavations conducted in the 20th century uncovered storerooms, a synagogue, and personal artifacts that have allowed archaeologists to reconstruct daily life atop the plateau with unusual precision for a site this ancient. Summer temperatures at Masada regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, and hikers attempting the historic snake path without sufficient water have required emergency rescue in multiple documented incidents. From a desert fortress defined by a legendary final stand, we now travel into the mountains of Iran. Alamut Castle, Iran. Hidden within the rugged Alborz Mountains of northern Iran, Alamut Castle served as the primary stronghold of Hassan-i Sabbah, founder of the Nizari Ismaili state, a mountain fortress so remote that it allowed a relatively small group to resist much larger powers. The group based here became widely known in medieval Europe through second-hand accounts as the Assassins, a name that eventually entered the English language itself, though many specific stories spread as exaggerated legend rather than fact. Mongol forces under Hulagu Khan finally destroyed the fortress in 1256, part of a broader Mongol campaign. And much of what once stood atop the ridge was deliberately demolished rather than simply abandoned. Reaching the ruins today still requires a demanding hike along narrow mountain trails, and the site's genuine isolation means modern visitors receive almost none of the infrastructure found at better-known sites. Sudden weather shifts in the Alborz range, including rapid temperature drops at altitude, have caught underprepared hikers off guard, adding real risk to a journey defined by remoteness. From a mountain hideout that gave the world a word for murder, we now travel to a fortress of mud, Bam Citadel, Iran. Rising from the edge of the Iranian desert along an ancient branch of the Silk Road, Argi Bam stood as the largest adobe structure on Earth, an entire fortified city built almost completely from sun-dried mud brick, clay, and straw rather than stone. Historical estimates place construction at over 2,000 years old, with major expansions occurring during the Safavid period. On December 26, 2003, a catastrophic earthquake reduced roughly 80% of the ancient citadel to rubble within seconds. One of the most devastating single losses of historic architecture in modern memory. International teams, coordinated partly through UNESCO, began painstaking reconstruction efforts afterward, carefully documenting and rebuilding sections using traditional mud brick techniques to preserve the site's original character. The same adobe construction that made Bam vulnerable to shaking also made it remarkably suited to extreme desert heat, keeping interior spaces naturally cool for centuries before the disaster. Ongoing seismic activity remains a sobering reality. From a mud fortress broken by the earth itself, we now travel north to an ancient gate built to seal off an entire mountain range. Naran Kala, Derbent, Russia, guarding the narrowest passage between the towering Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea. The fortress of Naran Kala anchors the ancient city of Derbent. A choke point earned the nickname the Caspian Gate. Sasanian Persian engineers constructed the earliest version around the 5th century CE, designing fortifications to block nomadic invasions. Remarkably, sections of Derbent's defensive wall once extended directly into the Caspian Sea itself, preventing enemy ships from simply sailing around the land fortifications, a rare example of fortress water integration. UNESCO recognized Derbent as one of the oldest continuously inhabited fortified settlements in Russia. Harsh winter winds funneling through the mountain pass still make the exposed fortress walls dangerously cold and icy, conditions that once made the position even harder for invading armies to hold. From a gate built to seal off an entire mountain range, we now travel east into Pakistan toward a fortress so cleverly designed that legend claims part of its construction remains hidden to this day. Rohtas Fort, Pakistan, built in the 16th century under the order of the Pashtun ruler Sher Shah Suri. Rohtas Fort was designed specifically to subdue the rebellious Ghakkar tribes of the Pothohar region, a massive fortification stretching over 4 kilometers in circumference with 68 bastions reinforcing its outer walls. Historical accounts note that Sher Shah Suri chose the site partly for its natural defensive terrain surrounded by ravines and elevated rock, and partly to project overwhelming military authority over a population that had resisted his rule directly. Local legend claims that a hidden underground passage, sometimes called a stepwell, connects the fortress to a distant water source, allowing defenders to survive prolonged sieges without needing to leave the walls, though the full extent of this passage remains only partially explored. Remarkably, despite its imposing scale, historical records suggest Rohtas Fort was never actually conquered through direct military assault during its active use, a rare achievement matched by very few fortresses. UNESCO recognized the site in 1997, citing its architectural blend of Indian, Persian, and Central Asian styles. From a fortress built to crush a rebellion, we now travel to a stronghold engineered with an acoustic trick so precise that a single clap could be heard nearly a kilometer away. Golconda Fort, India. Overlooking the city of Hyderabad in southern India, Golconda Fort rose to prominence between the 14th and 17th centuries as the capital of successive dynasties who grew immensely wealthy, controlling the region's diamond trade, including mines that historians believe once produced some of the most famous gemstones in the world. The fortress incorporates a remarkably sophisticated acoustic warning system built directly into its main entrance, where a single hand clap performed at a specific point beneath the entrance dome can be heard clearly at the highest pavilion nearly a kilometer up the hillside, allowing guards to instantly alert the ruler's palace of any approaching threat. Engineers achieved this effect using a combination of the dome's curved geometry and the hill's natural acoustics. Golconda eventually fell to the Mughal Empire in 1687 after an extended siege lasting many months, a conquest that historians note succeeded largely through betrayal and blockade rather than through breaching the walls directly. Extreme summer heat across the Deccan Plateau makes climbing to the upper pavilions physically demanding even for prepared modern visitors. From a fortress that could hear a whisper of danger from a kilometer away, we now travel to India's largest fort, Chittorgarh Fort, India. Spanning nearly 700 acres atop a plateau in Rajasthan, Chittorgarh stands as the largest fort in India. A fortified city complex containing palaces, temples, and water reservoirs sufficient to sustain thousands. The fort served for centuries as the primary capital of the Mewar Kingdom, a Rajput dynasty whose rulers repeatedly resisted invading forces, cementing Chittorgarh's reputation as a symbol of regional resistance. According to historical tradition, the defenders endured 3 separate major sieges. Historical accounts describe women of the fort choosing self-immolation, a ritual known as jauhar rather than face capture, a practice remembered today as both a historical event and a deeply significant cultural legend within Rajput heritage. Massive stepwells and reservoirs built directly into the fort's rock allowed thousands of residents to survive extended isolation. Today, the fort's scale means visitors can spend an entire day exploring its grounds without covering the full complex. From India's largest fortress city, we travel to a nearby wall so long that only one other defensive structure on Earth surpasses it. Kumbhalgarh Fort, India, encircled by a defensive wall stretching approximately 36 kilometers. Kumbhalgarh holds the distinction of having the second longest continuous fortification wall in the world, surpassed only by the Great Wall of China. Constructed in the 15th century under Rana Kumbha of the Mewar Kingdom, the fort sits at an elevation of over 1,100 meters. Within the Aravalli mountain range, its walls following the natural contours of 7 surrounding hill peaks, The fortress holds particular historical significance as the birthplace of Maharana Pratap, a Rajput ruler still celebrated in regional history. Remarkably, historical records suggest Kumbhalgarh was breached only once, and even then only after invaders managed to cut off the water supply. The surrounding wildlife sanctuary is home to leopards and other wild animals, a reminder that this landscape has never fully become tame. From a wall exceeded in length only by the Great Wall of China, we now travel to a fortress built entirely from mud brick in one of Arabia's most arid landscapes, Bahla Fort, Oman. Rising from the edge of an oasis in northern Oman, Bahla Fort was constructed primarily using sun-dried mud brick over stone foundations, a building technique that allowed the fortress's walls to remain naturally cool despite the surrounding region's extreme desert heat. Historical evidence traces major construction phases to between the 12th and 15th centuries under the Banu Nebahan tribe, who used the fortress and its surrounding oasis settlement to control valuable regional trade routes across the interior of the Arabian Peninsula. UNESCO designated Bahla Fort a World Heritage Site in 1987, citing it as one of the finest surviving examples of mud brick architecture, a recognition that also acknowledged the significant restoration work needed after centuries of erosion. Local oral tradition includes legends of sorcery and jinn associated with the fort and its unusually extensive irrigation channels. Stories historians treat as cultural folklore, reflecting the site's mysterious scale rather than documented historical fact. Flash flooding during rare desert rainstorms has historically threatened the mud brick structure's stability, requiring ongoing conservation efforts to protect walls that were never designed to withstand sustained water exposure. From a fortress wrapped in legends of sorcery, we now travel deeper into the desert toward a stronghold so massive it can reportedly be seen from miles across an empty horizon. Darawar Fort, Pakistan. Standing isolated in the heart of Pakistan's Cholistan Desert, Darawar Fort rises with 40 massive circular bastions, arranged along walls visible for a considerable distance across the flat, empty terrain surrounding it. A silhouette early travelers reportedly used as a navigation landmark long before modern roads existed. The fort's origins trace back to construction in the 9th century, though the structure seen today reflects rebuilding in the 18th century by the Abbasi Nawabs of Bahawalpur, who used it as a strategic outpost controlling desert trade routes. Extreme isolation remains the defining challenge of Darawar even now, since reaching the fort requires traveling for hours across unpaved roads, a genuine logistical barrier that keeps visitor numbers far lower than comparable forts elsewhere in the country. Summer temperatures in the Cholistan region regularly climb well past 45 degrees Celsius. And travelers without adequate preparation have faced serious danger attempting the journey during the hottest months. A nearby royal cemetery containing elaborately tiled tombs of the Abbasi rulers adds a somber historical layer to the landscape. From a fortress standing alone against an empty desert horizon, we now travel to Africa, toward a royal fortress city that blended architectural traditions from 3 separate continents. Fasil Gebi, Gondar, Ethiopia. Built beginning in the 1630s by Emperor Fasilides, Fasil Gebi forms a royal fortress city in the Ethiopian highlands, containing palaces and banquet halls that earned it the nickname the Camelot of Africa. The architecture blends Portuguese Jesuit influences with Indian construction techniques and long-standing local Aksumite building traditions. Gondar served as Ethiopia's imperial capital for over 2 centuries, a period of expansion with additional palaces, churches, and libraries, cementing the city's importance as a center of both political power and Ethiopian Orthodox Christian scholarship. UNESCO recognized Fasil Gebi as a World Heritage Site in 1979, highlighting its architectural uniqueness and its role in a period of Ethiopian history that resisted significant European colonization. An earthquake in the 18th century and damage during the Second World War both left lasting scars on the structures. From a fortress blending three continents' architectural traditions, we now travel to a stone city so precisely built that colonial explorers once refused to believe its own builders constructed it. Great Zimbabwe. Built by ancestors of the Shona people beginning around the 11th century, Great Zimbabwe stands as one of sub-Saharan Africa's largest stone complexes. Its massive granite walls constructed entirely through dry stone technique, meaning builders used no mortar whatsoever, yet still created structures that have survived largely intact for nearly 1,000 years. At its height, the fortress city likely supported a population of many thousands, serving as a political and economic center of a kingdom that controlled valuable regional trade in gold, ivory, and cattle across a wide network. European explorers who encountered the ruins initially and wrongly claimed the fortress must have been built by outside civilizations, a racially motivated theory now thoroughly discredited by modern archaeology, which confirmed indigenous African origins. The modern nation of Zimbabwe took its name directly from these ruins after independence in 1980, a deliberate reclamation of a heritage site that colonial narratives had spent decades trying to separate from its rightful builders. Erosion and stone removal have damaged sections, and ongoing conservation work continues to stabilize the structures. From a fortress whose true history had to be reclaimed from colonial denial, we now travel to an even lesser-known stone stronghold, one that guarded a gold trade route almost nobody outside West Africa has ever heard of. Lorapeni, Burkina Faso. Hidden within the dense woodlands of southwestern Burkina Faso, the stone ruins of Lorapeni represent the oldest and best-preserved fortified settlement of its kind in West Africa, a distinction that earned it UNESCO World Heritage status in 2009, though the site remains almost completely unknown to travelers outside the region. Archaeological evidence indicates the walled enclosure was constructed and used by the Loran or Kulango peoples, likely beginning between the 11th and 14th centuries, functioning as a fortified center along trans-Saharan trade routes that moved gold across the region for centuries. The stone walls, some still standing over 6 meters high, enclosed an area believed to have supported an organized community, involved directly in gold production and trade, connecting West African resources to distant markets across the Sahara and beyond. Despite its historical significance, Lorapeni receives a fraction of the visitors that better-known African heritage sites attract. A combination of its remote location, limited regional infrastructure, and simple lack of international awareness about its existence. Dense surrounding vegetation and the tropical climate have complicated ongoing archaeological work, with researchers still uncovering new information. From one of Africa's least visited fortresses, we now travel north along the Nile to a series of ancient strongholds that vanished beneath the waters of a modern dam. Semna Forts, Sudan, built along the Nile River in ancient Nubia during the reign of Pharaoh Senusret III around 1900 BCE. The Semna forts formed a chain of Egyptian military strongholds specifically constructed to control river trade and mark the southern frontier. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions found at the site explicitly forbade Nubian traders from passing the fortress boundary without official permission, offering historians rare direct textual evidence of how ancient border control actually functioned in practice nearly 4,000 years ago. During the 1960s, construction of the Aswan High Dam threatened to permanently submerge the forts beneath the rising waters of Lake Nasser, prompting an enormous international archaeological rescue campaign coordinated by UNESCO. Teams carefully documented, dismantled, and relocated portions of the Semna structures to higher ground before the flooding occurred. Though significant portions of the original ancient landscape surrounding the forts were lost beneath the reservoir permanently, this rescue effort remains one of the largest coordinated heritage preservation projects in history, a rare example of nations cooperating Today, visiting the relocated remains requires navigating a still remote stretch of the Sudanese Nile far from standard tourist infrastructure. From fortresses saved from a rising reservoir, we now travel to South America toward a fortress built from stones so massive that engineers still debate exactly how they were moved. Sacsayhuaman, Peru. Overlooking the former Inca capital of Cusco, Sacsayhuaman was constructed using massive polygonal limestone blocks. Some individual stones weighing over 100 tons, fitted together with such precision that even today a knife blade cannot slide between surfaces. Inca engineers built the fortress in the 15th century, shaping each irregular block to interlock perfectly with its neighbors. A technique that provided exceptional resistance against earthquakes, since the flexible joints could shift slightly without collapsing entirely. Exactly how Inca builders transported and lifted stones of this size without wheels, iron tools, or draft animals remains a subject of ongoing study, with several proposed methods debated but no single explanation universally confirmed by modern archaeologists and engineers. Spanish colonial forces used Sacsayhuaman as the site of a major and bloody battle in 1536 during the broader Inca rebellion against Spanish rule, after which colonizers dismantled significant portions of the fortress, using the smaller stones to construct churches and buildings in Cusco below. High-altitude conditions at over 3,500 meters can cause altitude sickness, an often underestimated physical challenge for visitors. From a fortress whose engineering still puzzles modern experts, we now arrive at our final destination, a mountain stronghold built by people who had just won their freedom. Citadelle La Ferrière, Haiti. Rising above the northern Haitian city of Cap-Haïtien atop the mountain peak known as Bonnet-à-l'Évêque, the Citadelle La Ferrière stands as the largest fortress in the entire Western Hemisphere, a colossal stone structure built between 1805 and 1820. Built under the order of King Henri Christophe, a former enslaved man who became a leader of the newly independent nation of Haiti. Fearing that France might attempt to reclaim its former colony and reimpose slavery by force, Christophe ordered the construction of a fortress capable of housing thousands of soldiers along with enough cannons, some reportedly numbering in the hundreds, to withstand any invasion. Historical accounts describe tens of thousands of formerly enslaved Haitians hauling massive cannons and materials up steep mountain paths. Using techniques adapted from both African and European engineering traditions, an extraordinary feat achieved without colonial resources. The fortress was never actually attacked, meaning its greatest legacy is the sheer psychological and physical statement it made simply by existing, a permanent declaration that Haiti's newly free population would defend their independence at any cost. Henri Christophe's own reign ended in tragedy. Facing rebellion and declining health, historical accounts describe him dying by suicide in 1820. And being buried within the very fortress he built, according to widely accepted historical tradition surrounding his final days. Frequent lightning strikes at this exposed mountain elevation have damaged sections of the structure over the past 2 centuries. And the difficult mountain trail leading to the citadel, still requiring hours of hiking or mule travel, keeps this site remarkably free of crowds. It stands today not just as a fortress, but as a monument built by people who had nothing given to them and everything to protect. From a cave fortress carved into a European cliffside to a mountain stronghold built by the hands of the newly free, this journey has carried us through centuries of history. Every fortress we have seen was born from the same simple, universal fear that everything a people has built could be taken away by someone stronger. And in nearly every case, the walls themselves outlasted the empires, religions, and rulers who ordered them razed, standing now as quiet witnesses. What remains today are not just piles of stone, but the physical memory of human resilience, ambition, and the lengths people will go to protect what matters most. If these forgotten fortresses reminded you that our planet still holds walls with stories left to tell, consider joining us again as we uncover more of the world's greatest forgotten wonders.